Hey guys, in this video we are going to learn how can we make a GraphQL request in Cypress. Now I have created one GraphQL project for you just in case you want to use this. Now in this project we are going to make CRUD operations. Now the other intent behind creating this project is, while creating this project I realized, what all components are involved in building a GraphQL application. And that ways, as a tester, I have to individually target each of those layers so that I can provide good coverage in testing. All right. So if interested, just open this repository, download all the code files. All right. Open that in Visual Studio Code, and in the terminal, execute the command npm install. Make sure that at this location you have this package.json file. In package.json file you see all the dependencies that we require to package this application properly. All right, so you say npm install, and that is definitely going to install all the dependencies. Great. Now the next thing is you have to start this project. And like I said, guys, we are going to perform the CRUD operation, which means that you require some kind of database. Okay, it could be a file, it could be a SQLite database, Postgres, MS SQL, whatever. All right, to keep things simple, right, I decided to go for SQLite, and that ways you don't need to install any SQL Server application separately. All right, so we're good. So we say npm start, and when I execute this command, at the root of the project, you would see one database.sqlite file being created. Okay, now in this project, we are going to work on a user entity. So a user will have like first name, last name, ID, and age. All right. So when you run this npm start command, we are going to create a user table as well. Okay, so let me hit enter, and let's wait for this to be completed. Alright, so now you see some SQL commands are also being executed, and at the root of the project you have this database.sqlite. Okay, and server started at this particular URL. So this is the URL, this is the endpoint that we are going to hit even from Cypress. But the first thing first, we got to get some sense of, how can I work with GraphQL queries. So for that, all you have to do is you have to copy this URL, open a browser, and just launch this. Now this is GraphQL playground. In here you can write your queries, but let's understand some basic things about GraphQL. So in GraphQL, guys, there is always one URL. Okay, there is always one endpoint. Then we always have just one method, HTTP post. Now what are the different operations we can perform in GraphQL? So broadly two. Number one, query. So query is like, there's a database, there's a table, and you're just reading the data from the table. That is called as querying. Okay, the other type is mutation. In mutation, whatever data that you have, you are mutating it. For example, you're creating a user, then you're updating a user, and you're deleting. So all these three operations falls under mutation. So wherever you are writing the query, it's going to be something like this. Okay, and this represents the set of attributes that you want to retrieve. So the REST API is like, when you run an endpoint, when you hit an endpoint, you see everything back. But in GraphQL you can filter out. Okay, so what all attributes you want to see. Okay, then in create you see mutation, and then these are few things that we are going to understand. Then we have this update, again mutation, and delete is also mutation. All right, so if I run this now, currently there are no users created in the database. We just started fresh. Okay, now we also have the documentation section in here, and you could see it says queries. Okay, so these are two queries possible, and three mutation possible. Okay, but we are solely going to work on user entity. All right, what do I need to test in GraphQL? I can't cover each and everything in just one video, so I want you to do research right on what all you have to test, but I'll give you some basic idea around which you have to run your queries. All right, so for that I open my source code, and in here, guys, the first thing is entity. Okay, so this entity is going to create table into the database, right? So I did not create that manually. All right, this is being created by this particular entity only, and in this entity you have this ID, which is annotated as a primary key. Then you have the first name, which is of type string, and this is again a column, and so on. All right, so yeah, last name and age. Now that's fine, that this is called as model, and if you might have used Pojo in Java, plain old Java object, then we just have the properties, right? So we create models whenever we create like APIs, and I already explained at least the REST API concept in one of my video, important API testing concept 101. All right, so if you have not watched that, it contains a lot of information, so go and check that out. So then I move on to resolvers. So what are these resolvers, right? So resolvers are basically the methods. Okay, so in here you see create user. Okay, it's of type mutation. Then again we have mutation update user. All right, then you have mutation delete user, and at the end you have query users. Okay, remember just these 4 names. I take you to the documentation again. Okay, and in here you see create user, update user, delete user. So these are the names of those resolver methods, right? The normal methods. Now these methods are going to of course take in some arguments. All right, so for example I say create user, and there is one argument that we are passing, and the name of that is options, and that options is of type user input. All right, so let's read the documentation. So we say create user, it takes in one argument, okay, the name of which is options, and the value is user input. So you click on this user input, and these are the values that you see in here. Okay, while creating the users, all 3 are mandatory, but in update what I have done is again pretty much the same. So in here you require an ID and the user update. So I take you the user update now. So these are my inputs. Okay, so we have user input and user update. So they are also very much like your model, but in here we have applied some kind of validations as well. Why? Because we want user to pass in the correct set of values. All right, so then you have got these user inputs basically. Okay, so user input for creating a user, and user update for creating the update. The only difference between these two is in update, right, I have made these properties as optional, meaning like if I don't make these optional, it is mandatory to provide all 3 properties while updating a user. So which is not correct, right? As a user I may want to update just the first name or last name or just age, right? So therefore I've made these optional. So why am I telling you this? Because these are the things, guys, that you have to test. So you have to test entity in terms of whether you have the correct schema into the database or not. Then you have this input types, wherein you have all the validations that you have to test, and this also defines the schema. So schema plus validations are the things that you have to test. Then you also have to test the resolvers. Why resolvers? Because we are making the database connections in the resolver component only. Okay, so whether the data is being successfully saved to the database, updated or not. So these are the operations that are being performed in the resolver, and that's what you have to test. All right, and besides that there are a lot of middlewares. For example, the authentication middleware, there could be a cross origin resource sharing middleware, and so on. All right, so besides this, what else do you have to test? As you could see, if I open this in here, this is the query that we are writing now. There could be a query wherein there are 10 relations, meaning you are querying 10 tables into the database. So you can imagine how thick that query can become, right? And you don't have any control how deep a user can go into those relations, and that way it is going to generate huge load onto your database. So it is very important you also test the performance of your GraphQL queries. All right, so that's pretty much what you have to test. Now the main game is to be able to create these queries. So I hope after explaining all these concepts like resolver, then you have the entities, and then you also have those input types. Okay, so these things will help you in forming the query. Also make sure that you ask your developers to provide you a documentation like this, okay, because it clearly says, okay, this is the name of the method, these are the arguments. Then if you see, I mean, this is just a number, pretty straightforward. But what about this user update? So you click on this and then you see, oh, there are these three things that you have to pass in the user update. All right, so let's get started. And by the way, in here also I have provided all these queries to you. Okay, all right, so why don't we give it a try? So when you start first and you say, okay, there are no users currently. Makes sense, right? We just started our application, so let us create a user. Now there were some validations, guys, we saw, right? So I just violate one of the validation, or why not just violate every validation? So we just make it so. Okay, so 3 characters are required in here, 3 in here, and this should be minimum 18. So I execute this, and guys, you get this error. Okay, so already some validations errors are present. Now let me change this back to valid values. Okay, and now when you hit enter, okay, the record is being created. That's the response. So we go to the users, and now we execute it, guys. So you say this. Now the power of GraphQL is, this is the complete response, right? I don't want to see the complete response. I just want these 2 values to be returned, and you could see that. Okay, that's possible. So it's up to you, whatever you want to retrieve. All right, then guys, update, pretty much the same. Again, this is your resolver, then this is your first argument, and this is your second argument, and this is that input class which I showed you when we have those validations. And in here I'm deciding to just update the first name, and not the last name and age. All right, so I hit enter. Okay, so this is the response that you see. You go to the users, you run it again, and now you see Steven Dave. Okay, and last one is delete. So again, this is your resolver method, which takes in one argument, ID, the value of which is 1 currently. So you execute it, so the user is deleted. You go to the users, you execute it. All right, so nothing is present there. All right, now you can use this application for practice purpose. And there might be a case when you say, okay, hey, now I want to start fresh. So it's damn simple. All you have to do is you have to terminate the flow of this program, right, by saying Control-C, and then you can say yes. And guys, all you have to do is you just have to delete this file. All right, it's that simple. And you have to start the application again. So again, it is going to first create the database, and because of those type ORM and all, it is going to create one users table into it. All right, so it's fresh and you can verify it. So if you execute it currently, you will not see anything. Now we are going to learn how can we hit these GraphQL endpoints from Cypress. All right, so for that I open Cypress, and guys, you just have to do one thing. You just have to create a folder inside GraphQL. All right, and depending upon what entity you are testing, user, and in here you're going to say export const create user, and then you have to use 2 backticks, and inside that just have to paste your query. Okay, like so. So there are 4 queries. All right, we are performing CRUD operations. So we have created 4 constants. We are exporting those constants, and we are storing those queries in those constants. Okay, remember, this is the trick. 2 backticks, inside that just paste your query. All right, and in very simple straightforward examples, even when you start connecting your GraphQL backend with React frontend, I've seen that developers store the queries like so. All right, but yeah, you might argue that hey, I can write dynamic queries. Yes, definitely. In those cases, of course, that has to be generated dynamically. But if you're in testing, we just have fixed set of queries that we want to run. Okay, so then we can do this. And of course, if you are really curious, right, you can dynamically generate your queries. Got to build a logic for that. All right, so we go to graphql.spec.js. This is my file. The first thing that we are doing is we are importing all those constants first in here. And guys, I've already created a video on CY.request. You might be disappointed because what I'm going to tell you is, hey, you don't need to do anything special for GraphQL. You're going to use the same cy.request. If you know this GraphQL concepts, right, you can easily do that. So we since the URL will remain the same, so I've stored that in a variable like so, and then we say cy.request, and then we are passing in this object, and that we say URL is this, method has to be post always, okay, and then you have body, okay, and in the body you just have to have one property query, and then you pass in those constants which we have imported, because these constants contain the actual query. But guys, how did I figure out that I have to mention query in here? All right, you might be wondering that. So it's very simple, guys. You can open any application which has the backend as GraphQL. For example, this, I just do the inspect, okay, I go to networks tab, and I just, let's say, delete this, okay, and when I do so, what do you see in here? So in the request payload, you have this object, and that object has contained one property operation name, and the operation name is nothing, guys, it's a name of the resolver, okay. Then the other thing was query, okay, query, and then whatever query that we have stored in our constant, we just have to provide it like so. All right, so that's how I figured out. I go in here, you say body query and create user. All right, and let us execute this. So the first thing that we are doing is we are mutating, we are creating the user, and just to keep things clear, instead of Kapil Dev, I say this time Sachin Dev. All right, so, and he would be around 40, and Dolkar. All right, so yeah, this is done, and let's see. Yeah, have I created it? And that's the thing, at times I get annoyed because I make a change, I save it, and it gets executed. So let us see whether, yeah, so that saved has triggered the first test. All right, not an issue. So all right, so we have this, great. So I skip it, and guys, the concept will remain the same. Now we move on to select user, and in here you just have to pass in that query. All right, so whatever we have saved in that, so we just say only, I run it, and yeah, I mean I can also show you that thing in here. So this is a simple assertion where I was expecting that two users should exist, but there was only one, and hence it got failed. So if I just make a change to this to have length 1, okay, and I execute this, I can safely execute this because there's a select query. So now it should get passed, okay, and you can see that in here. So this is your response, okay. You have this data, you have the users, and you have this user, okay, standard stuff. So we again go back, I set it to skip, guys, okay. Then we have this mutation and mutation update user, pretty standard, right, not doing anything. So now what are we doing? We have what do we have in update user? So we are changing the first name to Steven, so it would be Steven Tendulkar. All right, so let us change this to only and run it, okay. So run this. All right, so yeah, this has been executed, and here's the data, but let's go to our application and check whether this is, yeah, so you see Steven Tendulkar, great. So last one is delete, guys, same stuff, right. It's the fun was in knowing how a GraphQL is kind of built, as a tester, what are the different components that I have to test. Once that is known, I mean, after that it's very simple, straightforward, at least in Cypress, right. You don't have to do a lot of stuff. So last one is delete, so I just save it, and let's wait for this to be executed in here. All right, so it's executed. All right, let's go to our application and check for our user. Now guys, there's an interesting thing. So might be you have already realized this. There's just one endpoint and there's just one method, okay, in GraphQL. Now how are you going to intercept that? All right, because usually in REST APIs, you have at least the path portion which is different, and that ways you say okay, intercept only this request. But if they just one URL, right, how could you figure out okay that since I'm performing this particular operation, right, I want to intercept? So for example, in this case, you create a new item, right, and you want to ensure that once that GraphQL API call is complete, then you check that the new item is being created or not. Okay, so very simple. I hope you can connect with me quite easily now, guys. Yes, the endpoint is same and the method is also same, but the operation name, that is different. Okay, what are these operation names? These operation names are the name of the resolvers that I told you. Okay, so we are going to make use of this operation name. We are going to say, hey, okay, here's the endpoint, but look out for this operation name and accordingly intercept that request. Okay, so I'm going to create a separate video on this very soon. So in there we are going to see how can we intercept the GraphQL request. But that's about using cy.request and working with GraphQL. I hope you like this. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.